Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's been making waves across North America, the ongoing trade tensions between Canada and the United States, specifically around the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, and the tariffs that are shaking things up. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into global economics, trade, and everything that affects your wallet. All right, let's get into it. The trade relationship between Canada and the US is one of the most critical in the world. Think about it. Every single day, billions of dollars worth of goods and services cross the border. From the oil powering American homes to the cars rolling off assembly lines, these two economies are so intertwined that a hiccup on one side can send shockwaves to the other. But right now, we're not just talking about a hiccup. We're talking about a full-on trade showdown, with tariffs on steel, aluminum and autos at the center of it all. And as of September 1st, 2025, Canada's made a bold move that's got everyone talking. So, what's going on? Why does it matter? And how does it affect you, whether you're in Toronto, Texas, or anywhere else? Let's break it down. First, let's set the stage. Canada and the US aren't just neighbors, they're each other's biggest trading partners. In 2024 alone, the US imported $413 billion worth of goods from Canada, and Canada took in $349 billion in US exports. That's not pocket change. This trade supports millions of jobs on both sides of the border, from farmers growing crops to factory workers building cars. It's not just about money, it's about livelihoods, communities, and the stuff you buy every day, like your morning coffee or the car you drive. At the heart of this relationship is the USMCA, the trade deal that replaced NAFTA back in 2020. The USMCA keeps about 85% of trade between the US and Canada tariff-free, which means goods can flow across the border without extra taxes hiking up prices. This is huge for industries like automotive, where parts crisscross the border multiple times before a car is finished. But here's the catch. Not everything falls under USMCA's protection, and that's where the drama starts. President Donald Trump has been turning up the heat with tariffs, taxes on imported goods, targeting key Canadian industries like steel, aluminum and autos. Canada, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, isn't just sitting back. They've responded with their own tariffs, and as of September 1st, 2025, they've made a strategic shift that's got analysts buzzing. Let's unpack it. So what's the big news? Starting September 1st, 2025, Canada announced it's removing retaliatory tariffs on US goods that comply with USMCA rules. This means that American products meeting the agreement's standards, like specific rules about where goods are made or how much North American content they have, can now enter Canada without extra taxes. But, and this is a big but, Canada is keeping its 25% counter tariffs on US steel, aluminum and autos. Why? Because these are the sectors where Canada's fighting hardest to protect its interests. This move isn't just a random decision, it's a calculated one. Back in March 2025, Canada slapped tariffs on $29.8 billion worth of US goods, including $12.6 billion in steel, $3 billion in aluminum, and $14.2 billion in other stuff like tools, computers, and sports equipment. These were a direct response to US tariffs that kicked in on March 12th, hitting Canadian steel and aluminum with a 25% tax, later raised to 50% in June. Autos got hit with a 25% tariff too. Canada's counter-tariffs were a dollar-for-dollar retaliation, a way of saying, if you tax us, we'll tax you right back. But now, by lifting tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, Canada's narrowing its focus. It's keeping the pressure on steel, aluminum and autos, industries that are super integrated across North America and hit hardest by US tariffs, while easing up elsewhere. Some folks see this as Canada backing down, but that's not quite right. It's more like a tactical reset. Canada's saying, we're not here to escalate a full-blown trade war. We're going to fight smart, focusing on the sectors that matter most. And trust me, Canada's got some serious cards to play in this game. Let's talk about why Canada's not just rolling over. Canada is the US's single largest customer for a ton of critical industries. Think about energy. The US relies on Canada for nearly 4 million barrels of oil every single day. That's not just gas for your car, it's fuel for refineries, power plants and industries across the country. Then there's uranium. Over a quarter of the US's supply comes from Canada, powering nuclear reactors that keep the lights on. And it's not just energy. Canadian pension funds hold over $1 trillion in US assets, and they could pump in another $100 billion a year if they wanted to. That's a lot of economic muscle. Then there's the auto industry. Cars built in North America are like a giant puzzle, with parts moving back and forth across the border. A single car might cross the US-Canada border 7 times before it's finished. US tariffs on Canadian autos and parts are a big deal because they mess with this tightly knit supply chain. If costs go up, it's not just Canadian workers who feel it. American factories and consumers get hit too. And don't forget minerals. Canada supplies critical stuff like copper and lithium, which are essential for everything from electric vehicle batteries to tech gadgets. By keeping tariffs on steel, aluminum and autos, Canada's signalling that it's not afraid to push back. These sectors are where Canada's leverage is strongest, and Prime Minister Mark Carney knows it. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc put it bluntly, Canada's not surrendering. Instead, they're consolidating their firepower, focusing on the industries that Washington can't easily ignore. This is strategic patience in action, holding firm without escalating into an all-out trade war. Now, this move has sparked a big debate. Some critics in Canada are saying, "Hold up, are we giving in too fast?" They point to earlier concessions, like Canada softening its stance on digital services taxes or boosting defense spending, and worry that every step back makes Trump think he can demand more. They're not wrong to be cautious. Trump's trade playbook is all about applying maximum pressure, threaten high tariffs like 50% on metals, then settle for something lower but still keep the upper hand. It's a tactic he's used with Europe, where he got them to agree to 15% tariffs and big purchases of US energy and tech. But others see Canada's move as a smart play. Former finance advisors and analysts argue that dropping tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods isn't about weakness, it's about helping Canadian families and businesses. Tariffs aren't just a government thing, they hit real people. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business reported a couple of years ago that retaliatory tariffs were crushing small and medium-sized firms. Higher costs for imported goods like food, clothing, and electronics were getting passed on to consumers who were already dealing with inflation. By lifting some tariffs, Canada's easing that pressure, especially for households feeling the squeeze at the grocery store or the mall. Plus, there's a bigger picture here. By aligning with the US's own policy of keeping USMCA-compliant goods tariff-free, Canada's strengthening its credibility. It's saying, we're playing by the rules of the agreement we both signed. That's a strong position going into negotiations, especially with the USMCA review looming in 2026. Canada's not just reacting to Trump's moves, it's setting itself up to negotiate from a place of strength. Let's zoom in on what this means for everyday people. Tariffs sound like something only economists care about, but they're showing up in your grocery bill, your car payment, even your morning coffee. In the US, those 50% tariffs on Canadian aluminum are making canned goods pricier. A recent poll showed 53% of Americans now say grocery costs are a major source of stress. In Florida, shoppers are seeing Parmesan cheese jump from $12.99 to $16.99, and coffee and meat from other countries are climbing too, because of US tariffs. One guy even told reporters he's thinking about eating out more because cooking at home is getting too expensive. In Canada, it's a similar story. Those US tariffs on steel and aluminum are hitting places like Quebec and Ontario hard, where mills and factories employ thousands. The auto tariffs are messing with assembly lines, threatening jobs in both countries. But by removing tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, Canada's trying to ease some of that pain for its own consumers. It's a balancing act. Keep the pressure on the US in key sectors while giving Canadians a break where it counts. So, where do we go from here? The USMCA is set for a big review in July 2026, but there's talk that Trump might try to reopen it sooner, maybe even before the end of 2025. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been vocal about this, warning that Trump's unpredictable and could try to shake things up early. Canada's response? Stay patient, stay united, and keep building. Carney's been working with Mexico to coordinate their approach, making sure North America presents a united front. He's also teaming up with provincial leaders like Ford to double down on competitiveness. Think tax cuts, less red tape, and big investments in things like housing, AI, and critical minerals. This isn't just about surviving tariffs. It's about setting Canada up for the long haul. The federal government's pouring billions into healthcare, infrastructure, and skills training to keep the economy strong. Ontario's got a $1.5 billion fund to help companies hit by US tariffs, and another $2.5 billion for workers to learn new skills. They're even investing $500 million to process critical minerals domestically, so Canada's not just digging up resources, but turning them into high-value products. It's all part of what Carney and Ford call Team Canada, a strategy to make Canada the best place to invest, no matter what Washington does. We're diving deeper into the trade showdown, looking at President Trump's playbook, how Europe's deal with the US sets the stage, and why Canada's choosing a different path. Let's start with the man at the center of this storm, US President Donald Trump. If you've followed his approach to trade, you know he's all about turning up the pressure to get what he wants. His philosophy? Tariffs are a tool to bring trading partners to the table, make them sweat, and walk away with a deal that puts America first. And he's not shy about it. Trump's been celebrating his tariff campaign as a win, pointing to billions of dollars rolling into Washington's coffers. But as we'll see, those tariffs come with a cost, not just for Canada, but for American consumers and businesses too. Trump's strategy is pretty clear. Threaten big, settle lower, but always keep the upper hand. Take the US. EU trade framework announced earlier in 2025. The US slapped 15% tariffs on European imports, a far cry from the 250% he once floated for pharmaceuticals. In return, Europe agreed to drop duties on US industrial goods, open markets for American agriculture and seafood, and commit to massive purchases. $750 billion for US energy like liquefied natural gas and oil, plus $40 billion for AI chips through 2028. That's a big haul, but it came at a price. Europe's stuck with 15% tariffs, and car tariff cuts are on hold until they change their laws. It's classic Trump. Make bold demands, get concessions, and keep leverage for the next round. Now apply that to Canada. Since August 1st, 2025, Canadian goods outside USMCA rules have been hit with a 35% tariff, up from 25%, with steel and aluminum facing a whopping 50%. Autos are at 25%, and Trump's made no secret that he wants cars built in the US, not Canada or anywhere else. He's been saying for decades that American manufacturing, especially autos, should stay on American soil. That's why the auto sector is the stickiest issue in this whole trade fight. But Canada's not Europe, and Prime Minister Mark Carney's not playing the same game. Let's see why. Unlike Europe, which moved fast to lock in a deal with a 15% tariff ceiling, Canada's taking its time. After missing the August 1st deadline for a new trade deal, Carney picked up the phone and called Trump directly. The Canadian government called the talk substantive and productive, but no deal was announced. That's telling. Canada's not rushing to sign just anything. Carney's made it clear it's got to be a good deal, not a quick one. This approach, strategic patience, is Canada's answer to Trump's high-pressure tactics. Why the slow play? For one, Canada's got stronger cards than Europe. The US relies on Canada for critical resources, 4 million barrels of oil a day, over a quarter of its uranium, and minerals like lithium and copper that power everything from EVs to smartphones. In 2024, Canadian energy exports to the US hit $150 billion, and that's not something Washington can easily replace. Then there's the auto industry, where supply chains are so integrated that a tariff on Canadian parts raises costs for American factories too. Canada's also a massive investor in the US, with pension funds holding over $1 trillion in American assets. That's economic weight Europe didn't have at the negotiating table. Carney's team is also looking at the bigger picture. By holding firm, Canada avoids locking in concessions that could hurt key sectors like steel, autos, or supply-managed agriculture. Think dairy and poultry, which are tightly controlled to protect Canadian farmers. Unlike Europe, which accepted a fixed tariff ceiling to get certainty, Canada's betting that patience will pay off. They're also strengthening ties with Mexico, building a united North American front. If Trump tries to reopen USMCA early, say before the 2026 review, Canada and Mexico could push back together, making it harder for Washington to dictate terms. At the heart of this standoff is the USMCA itself. This deal is the backbone of North American trade, keeping 85% of goods tariff-free and supply chains humming. But it's under strain. U.S. Ambassador Pete Huxra has accused Canada of undermining USMCA by hitting back with retaliatory tariffs. In Ottawa, they see it differently. Trump started this trade war and Canada's just defending itself. The truth? Both sides have a point. Tariffs are disrupting the integration that USMCA was designed to protect, but Canada's counter-tariffs are a direct response to US moves. If USMCA were to collapse or get renegotiated on Trump's terms, the fallout would be massive. For Canada, it could mean higher costs for exports, job losses in key industries, and a hit to economic growth. For the US, it's not much better. American industries rely on Canadian oil, gas, and auto parts. If tariffs keep climbing, costs spike for everyone: factories, workers, and consumers. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has warned that Trump might try to reopen USMCA before the scheduled 2026 review, maybe even by November 2025. That's a big what-if hanging over both countries. But here's the kicker. Canada's not just waiting around. They're diversifying export markets, cozying up to Mexico, and investing at home to stay competitive. Ontario's signed new trade agreements with other provinces under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which could add $200 billion to economic output. The federal government's pumping billions into healthcare, infrastructure, and housing to keep things stable. This isn't just about surviving tariffs. It's about building a stronger Canada, no matter what Trump does. Let's talk about the human side of this. Tariffs aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're hitting people's wallets. In the US, those 50% tariffs on Canadian aluminum are making canned goods like soda and soup pricier. In Seal County, Florida, shoppers are seeing Parmesan cheese jump from $12.99 to $16.99, and coffee and meat from Brazil, hit with 50% US tariffs, are climbing too. A recent poll found 53% of Americans say grocery costs are a major stressor. One Florida resident told reporters he's thinking about eating out more because cooking at home is too expensive. That's the reality of tariffs. They're a tax consumers pay, not just some abstract policy. In Canada, the pain's just as real. US tariffs on steel and aluminum are hammering Quebec and Ontario, where mills employ thousands. Auto tariffs are threatening jobs on assembly lines that span the border. Small businesses, already hit hard by inflation, are struggling with higher costs for imported goods. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business said 2 years ago that retaliatory tariffs were crushing smaller firms, and that hasn't changed. By lifting tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, Canada's trying to ease some of that burden, but the fight's far from over. Trump sees tariffs as a revenue stream and a way to tip the scales in America's favor. But the longer this goes on, the more it backfires. Higher prices are squeezing American families, and businesses are buying less because of the costs. The US Census Bureau says imports are dropping as companies cut back, which makes foreign goods even pricier. That's not a win. It's a cycle that hurts everyone. While Trump's playing hardball, Canada's doubling down on what it can control. On August 18, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford met in Ottawa to map out their response. Their focus? Building Canada's competitiveness from within. Carney talked about investing in housing, steel, autos, and new fields like artificial intelligence. Ford, in his straight-talking way, said it's time to stop worrying about Trump's unpredictability and start making Canada the best place to invest. He pointed to Ontario's 2024 numbers, $39.9 billion in foreign direct investment, creating 25,000 jobs. The goal is to keep that momentum going. This is where Team Canada comes in. It's not just a catchy phrase, it's a strategy. Federal and provincial governments are working together alongside Indigenous communities and businesses to strengthen the economy. Ontario's launched a $1.5 billion fund to help companies hit by US tariffs, plus $2.5 billion for skills training to get workers ready for new opportunities. They're also investing $500 million to process critical minerals like lithium domestically, turning raw resources into high-value products. These moves aren't just about surviving the trade war. They're about setting Canada up to thrive for decades. Ford's been clear about the stakes. He told audiences in the US that tariffs on Canadian goods are basically taxes on American families because the economies are so linked. Higher costs for Canadian oil or parts mean higher prices for everything from gas to cars. Canada's not just fighting for itself, it's reminding the US that this trade war hurts both sides. So what's the big takeaway? This trade standoff isn't just about tariffs or USMCA, it's a test of who can hold out longer. Trump's banking on pressure to force Canada into a deal that favors the US, but Canada's playing a longer game, using its leverage in energy, autos and minerals to stay strong. Carney's strategic patience, backed by Team Canada's focus on competitiveness, is about enduring the storm without giving up key advantages. The next few months will be critical. With the USMCA review set for 2026 and Trump possibly pushing to reopen it sooner, both sides are jockeying for position. Canada's building alliances with Mexico, diversifying markets and investing at home to weather whatever comes next. Meanwhile, American consumers are feeling the pinch, and that could shift the political calculus if prices keep climbing. At the core of this trade saga is the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, the deal that keeps North American trade flowing smoothly. It's a big deal. 85% of goods cross the US-Canada border tariff-free, supporting industries like autos, energy and agriculture. But right now, the USMCA is under serious pressure. US Ambassador Pete Huxra has accused Canada of undermining the agreement with its retaliatory tariffs, while Ottawa insists they're just defending themselves against Trump's trade war. Both sides have a point, but the bigger question is, what happens if the USMCA gets reopened, or worse, falls apart? If Trump pushes to renegotiate USMCA before its scheduled 2026 review, Ontario Premier Doug Ford thinks he might try as early as November 2025, the stakes are huge. For Canada, a bad deal could mean higher tariffs on key exports like steel, aluminum and autos, costing jobs in places like Quebec and Ontario. It could also hit supply-managed sectors like dairy and poultry, where Canada tightly controls production to protect farmers. For the US, dismantling USMCA would spike costs for industries that rely on Canadian oil, gas and auto parts. In 2024, Canada sent $150 billion worth of energy to the US, and American factories depend on Canadian parts for cars. A collapse would disrupt supply chains and drive up prices for everyone. But it's not just about economics. The USMCA is a symbol of North American unity, and tearing it up could strain political ties. Canada's already working with Mexico to present a united front, which could make it harder for Trump to dictate terms. Prime Minister Mark Carney's betting on this, choosing strategic patience over rushing into a deal that might hurt Canada's long-term interests. Meanwhile, Trump's team sees tariffs as leverage, not punishment. But the longer this drags on, the more pressure builds on both sides. So how's Canada preparing for this uncertainty? They're not just sitting back waiting for Trump's next move. They're building a stronger, more competitive economy from within. This is what Carney and Ford call Team Canada, and it's all about taking control of their own destiny. Let's break down what they're doing. First, Canada's investing big at home. The federal government's pouring billions into healthcare, infrastructure and housing to keep the economy stable. Ontario alone has launched a $1.5 billion financing program for companies hit by US tariffs, helping them weather the storm. They're also putting $2.5 billion into skills training, so workers can pivot to new opportunities in growing fields like tech and clean energy. And here's a cool one. A $500 million fund to process critical minerals like lithium and copper domestically. Instead of just mining raw materials, Canada wants to turn them into high-value products, like batteries for electric vehicles. That's a game-changer for long-term growth. Second, Canada's boosting internal trade. Ontario signed new agreements with every other province and territory under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, cutting red tape and barriers. Officials estimate this could add $200 billion to Canada's economic output in the coming years. That's like giving the economy a turbo boost, making it less dependent on what happens in Washington. Third, Canada's diversifying its markets. While the US is their biggest customer, they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. Carney's team is strengthening ties with Mexico, building a stronger North American bloc. They're also looking at markets like Asia and Europe to grow exports, especially for energy and minerals. This isn't just about surviving tariffs, it's about making Canada a global player no matter what Trump does. Let's zoom in on the real-world impact, because this trade war isn't just about politicians and numbers, it's hitting everyday people. In the US, those 50% tariffs on Canadian aluminum are making canned goods like soda, soup, and even beer pricier. In Searle County, Florida, shoppers are seeing Parmesan cheese jump from $12.99 to $16.99, and coffee and meat from Brazil, hit with 50% US tariffs, are climbing too. A recent poll found 53% of Americans say grocery costs are a major source of stress, and it's changing how people live. One Florida resident told reporters he's eating out more because cooking at home is too expensive. That's not just a policy, it's a daily struggle. In Canada, the pain's just as real. US tariffs on steel and aluminum are hammering mills in Quebec and Ontario, threatening thousands of jobs. Auto tariffs are disrupting assembly lines that employ workers on both sides of the border. Small businesses are getting crushed by higher costs for imported goods, and consumers are feeling it at the checkout. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business said 2 years ago that retaliatory tariffs were killing smaller firms, and that pressure hasn't let up. By lifting tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, Canada's trying to ease some of that burden. But it's a balancing act, protecting key industries while keeping costs down for families. Trump frames tariffs as a win, pointing to the billions they're bringing into Washington. But here's the catch. Those tariffs are backfiring. Higher prices are squeezing American families, and businesses are buying less because of the costs. The US Census Bureau says imports are dropping, which makes foreign goods even pricier. This isn't just a trade fight, it's a test of who can endure the pain longer. This whole saga boils down to a clash of styles. Trump's all about short-term wins, big threats, bold moves, and headline-grabbing deals. He used that playbook with Europe, getting them to sign a framework with 15% tariffs and massive energy purchases. But Canada's playing a different game. Carney's strategic patience is about looking past the immediate pressure and building for the future. He's not saying Canada will never negotiate, but it has to be a deal that works for Canadians, not just one that gets Trump a photo op. Ontario Premier Doug Ford's been blunt about it. Trump's unpredictable. "I don't even know if he knows what he's doing tomorrow morning," Ford said. His point? Canada can't base its future on trying to guess Trump's next tweet. Instead, they're focusing on what they can control, cutting taxes, reducing red tape, and making Canada the most competitive place to invest. In 2024, Ontario attracted $39.9 billion in foreign direct investment, creating 25,000 jobs. Ford wants to double down on that, turning Canada into a magnet for business, tariffs or no tariffs. This contrast, Trump's pressure politics versus Canada's long-term vision, sets the stage for what's next. The USMCA review in July 2026 is the big deadline, but if Trump tries to reopen it early, Canada's ready. They've got leverage in energy, autos and minerals, and they're building alliances with Mexico to strengthen their position. Plus, American voters are starting to feel the tariff pinch, and that could shift the political landscape if prices keep rising into the fall. So, what's the big picture? This trade standoff isn't just about Canada and the US, it's about the future of North America. The USMCA was designed to keep the region integrated, competitive and strong. If it unravels, everyone loses. Higher costs for goods, disrupted supply chains, and strained political ties could ripple across the continent. But if Canada and the US can find a way to negotiate without blowing up the deal, it could set the stage for a more resilient North American economy. Canada's betting on endurance. By holding firm, investing at home, and diversifying markets, they're showing they can weather the storm. Carney and Ford's Team Canada approach is about unity, bringing together provinces, businesses, and communities to build a stronger future. They're not just reacting to Trump, they're writing their own script, one that prioritizes long-term growth over short-term concessions. For the US, the challenge is balancing Trump's America First agenda with the reality that tariffs hurt American consumers too. If prices keep climbing, voters might start asking whether the tariff game is worth it. That's where Canada's patience could pay off. By staying steady, they're hoping to outlast the pressure and come out stronger. All right, we've covered the tariff moves, Trump's playbook, Canada's strategic patience, and what's at stake for North America. This isn't just a trade war, it's a test of vision, endurance, and who can set the terms for the next decade. Canada's made it clear they're not for sale and they're not backing down. But they're also not escalating. They're building, preparing, and waiting for the right moment. What do you think happens next? Will Canada and the US strike a deal before the 2026 USMCA review, or are we headed for more tension? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let me know if you want more deep dives like this, maybe on Canada's moves with Mexico or what's happening with global trade. If you found this series helpful, smash that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.